Rwanda Statistical Yearbook 2024. Trends in Labor Force Indicators, 2019 to 2023. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Introduction. Rwanda's labor force dynamics from 2019 to 2023 reveal an unsettling combination of progress and profound failures. While labor force participation rates have steadily increased, this growth has been undermined by systemic inefficiencies that expose critical flaws in the country's economic framework. High informal employment rates remain an undeniable stain, trapping the majority of the workforce in low-paying, insecure jobs. Persistent unemployment disparities, particularly among youth, women, and persons with disabilities, highlight glaring inequities that policy interventions have failed to address. Furthermore, the stark mismatch between workforce skills and market demands speaks to a failure in both education systems and industrial policy. These indicators reflect a labor market riddled with structural weaknesses, where gains in participation and wages mask deeper socio-economic challenges. This chapter confronts these harsh realities, critically analyzing the trends and proposing urgent evidence-based solutions to prevent the perpetuation of these entrenched issues. One. Labor force participation and employment trends. Labor force participation rates showed consistent growth from 53.4% in 2019 to 59.3% in 2023. However, this surface-level improvement conceals deeper, systemic failures in Kagame's Rwanda. The 2023 spike likely reflects temporary economic or policy changes rather than sustainable growth, as the employment-to-population ratio fluctuated wildly, reaching a low of 42.6% in 2021 before a partial recovery to 49% in 2023. Meanwhile, the informal employment rate has remained alarmingly high at around 90%, exposing the chronic inability to create formal, secure jobs in the economy. The stark realities go further. The high informal employment rate, 90.3% in 2023, illustrates not just scarcity, but a glaring failure of governance to transition workers into formal sectors. Compounding this, permanent jobs declined from 30.3% in 2019 to a dismal 24.1% in 2023, leaving workers increasingly exposed to employment instability and economic vulnerability. These trends reflect an economic framework that prioritizes appearances over substantive change, leaving the majority of Rwandans trapped in precarious conditions with little hope for long-term stability. Two. Education and employment. The proportion of the labor force with at least secondary education decreased from 17.4% in 2019 to 15.4% in 2023, a glaring failure in Kagame's Rwanda to expand access to foundational educational qualifications. This regression indicates not only barriers to educational attainment, but also a systemic neglect in creating an environment that incentivizes or enables higher education. It reflects a government focus on optics rather than addressing structural gaps in access to quality education. Employment rates among graduates reveal the uneven nature of any progress made. While technical vocational education and training (TVET) graduates experience steady improvement, with employment rates reaching 64.6% in 2023, General education graduates lag far behind, with only a marginal increase from 39.7% in 2021 to 46.4% in 2023. This disparity underscores the chronic misalignment between general education and labor market demands, leaving a large swath of the workforce ill-prepared for available opportunities. High unemployment among secondary school graduates, 23.1% in 2023, is a scathing indictment of the system's inability to bridge skill gaps or regulate the supply of workers with secondary-level qualifications. The oversupply of such workers, combined with a lack of meaningful employment opportunities, reflects a governance failure to address the foundational deficiencies of Rwanda's education system. With many individuals entering the workforce without basic skills or relevant qualifications, the education-to-employment pipeline remains broken, leaving a generation ill-equipped for meaningful economic contribution. Additionally, the limited progress in promoting higher educational attainment exacerbates the risk of long-term economic stagnation, as the workforce lacks the advanced skills required for more complex and higher-paying roles. Kagame's regime's prioritization of surface-level metrics over substantive structural reforms continues to widen these socio-economic fissures. Three, unemployment dynamics. Overall, unemployment reached its peak at 21.1% in 2021 but marginally improved to 17.2% in 2023, offering a misleading impression of progress. Gender disparity in unemployment remains a glaring issue, with female unemployment consistently higher than male unemployment. In 2023, female unemployment stood at a troubling 20.3%, down from 24.1% in 2021, while male unemployment fell from 18.5% in 2021 to 14.5% in 2023. This persistent gap underscores the systemic neglect of women's economic inclusion. Youth unemployment, while declining from its peak of 26.5% in 2021 to 20.8% in 2023, remains alarmingly high, reflecting deep failures in creating pathways to meaningful employment for Rwanda's younger population. These figures reveal more than just disparities. They expose the systemic inadequacies of Kagame's Rwanda. Persistent gender and youth unemployment disparities highlight the hollow nature of economic reforms that fail to address the structural inequalities ingrained in the labor market. Furthermore, unemployment among persons with disabilities, fluctuating and reaching 18.9% in 2023, points to a complete absence of targeted support mechanisms. These realities expose a governance framework that prioritizes image over substance, leaving the most vulnerable populations without meaningful opportunities or support. Fourth, work patterns and wages. Weekly hours worked experienced notable changes over the years, but the realities behind these shifts are emblematic of the broader systemic failures in Kagame's Rwanda. Actual hours dropped significantly to 30 hours in 2021 before returning to the same level by 2023. Meanwhile, usual hours remained stable at 36 hours, reflecting not consistency, but a chronic underemployment issue that keeps many workers locked in a cycle of economic inadequacy. Wages showed growth across sectors, particularly in services, where average monthly earnings increased from 103,694 francs in 2019 to 130,699 francs in 2023. Industry wages also rose markedly, from 63,346 francs to 680 francs, 88,877. However, these numbers mask the stark inequities underlying the labor market. Agricultural wages, while improving to 28,257 francs in 2023, remained abysmally low, highlighting the neglect of the sector that sustains a significant portion of the population. This persistent wage disparity underscores the country's failure to address fundamental income inequalities. Despite these surface-level improvements, the underlying issues are glaring. The persistent gap between agricultural and non-agricultural wages is not just an economic flaw, it's a testament to systemic neglect. Time-related underemployment, which remains high at 29.4% in 2023, further reflects the inefficiencies and lack of strategic vision within Rwanda's labor market governance. These failures leave a significant portion of the workforce underutilized, perpetuating cycles of poverty and limiting the country's long-term growth potential. Fifth, sector-specific employment. Agriculture continues to dominate employment, but this reliance exposes systemic failures rather than progress. Its share has slightly declined from 46.8% in 2022 to 43.8% in 2023, indicating minimal diversification despite decades of rhetoric about modernizing the economy. Industry employment has faced an alarming and consistent decline, plummeting from 20.4% in 2020 to 16.7% in 2023, signaling a collapse in Rwanda's industrial growth and highlighting governance neglect of critical sectors needed for sustainable development. Meanwhile, services employment has increased to 39.8% in 2023, reflecting a shift that risks becoming superficial without strategic investments in productivity and capacity building. Women and youth employment trends reveal a veneer of progress but mask deeper inequities. While women's share in non-agricultural employment rose to 37.7% in 2023, this incremental improvement is insufficient to overcome the entrenched barriers they face in accessing leadership roles or higher quality jobs. Youth employment, at 45.9% in 2023, has fluctuated without substantial progress, underscoring a systemic failure to create stable, meaningful employment opportunities for Rwanda's young population. The broader picture remains grim. The collapse in industrial employment, coupled with stagnation in manufacturing, a mere 5.5% in 2023, poses a grave risk to sustained economic development and reflects a lack of coherent industrial policy. Women and youth remain disproportionately locked out of higher quality jobs, and the lack of targeted interventions exacerbates these inequities. Kagame's governance has prioritized superficial metrics over addressing the underlying structural deficiencies, leaving Rwanda's labor market teetering on a fragile foundation. Sixth, labor underutilization. Labor underutilization has remained persistently high, underscoring the systemic failures deeply entrenched in Kagame's governance. Time-related underemployment peaked at a staggering 31.7% in 2022, slightly improving to 29.4% in 2023. But these marginal gains are far from sufficient. The combined rate of labor underutilization stood at an appalling 54.4% in 2023, a glaring indictment of the government's inability to fully engage its workforce in productive activities. This failure not only reflects inefficiencies in labor allocation, but also reveals a governance model that prioritizes superficial metrics over substantive reforms. A closer look exposes foundational issues driving these inefficiencies. Skill mismatches remain rampant, with industries requiring advanced technical expertise struggling to find adequately trained workers. The manufacturing and technology sectors, which should be cornerstones of economic growth, have stagnated or even declined, reducing their ability to create meaningful jobs. This stagnation is a direct consequence of insufficient investment in vocational training and education tailored to real market needs, leaving much of the workforce ill-equipped for employment in high-potential industries. Job creation efforts have been woefully inadequate, particularly in sectors that could drive growth and diversification. Agriculture continues to dominate employment but shows limited capacity for further expansion, reflecting a lack of modernization or investment in this critical sector. Meanwhile, industrial employment, a key driver of sustainable development, has plummeted to 16.7% in 2023. This collapse highlights the government's failure to foster an environment conducive to industrial growth, further compounding the country's labor underutilization crisis. Addressing these systemic failures demands bold, immediate action. This includes incentivizing industry-led job creation initiatives, overhauling educational curricula to align with market demands, and fostering public-private partnerships to bridge the skills gap. Moreover, the adoption of modern technology and strategic investment in high-potential sectors must become central to policy efforts. Without these critical interventions, Rwanda's labor underutilization will persist, perpetuating poverty and stifling economic growth. Conclusion. Rwanda's labor market tells a story of surface-level gains masking deep structural failures. Increased labor force participation and rising wages may appear as progress, but they are overshadowed by persistent issues such as staggeringly high informal employment rates, sectoral stagnation, and an alarming degree of labor underutilization. These failures reflect the systemic shortcomings of Kagame's governance, which prioritizes optics over substantive reform. High informal employment traps millions in economic precarity, while sectoral stagnation, exemplified by the collapse of industrial growth and underinvestment in manufacturing, underscores a lack of strategic vision. Labor underutilization remains an indictment of the administration's inability to harness the full potential of its workforce, perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. Addressing these entrenched failures requires more than vague policy rhetoric. It demands a complete overhaul of Rwanda's economic priorities, with genuine investments in skill development, sectoral diversification, and equitable job creation. Without these urgent and transformative measures, Rwanda's labor market will remain a fragile foundation, incapable of supporting long-term development or delivering meaningful opportunities to its people.